Okay, welcome to the Ivory Tower. I'm here with my Sunday lineup of columnists, Caron, Bill Nemitz, and Cynthia Dill. And I shouldn't be so possessive. They're everybody's Sunday columnists. They're not just mine. And we are going to reflect on some news of the week. Alan has flagged our interest in a poll by, was it CNN or
CBS?
CBS,
Yep.
Of Trump voters really kind of digging into the kind of decision-making people made to vote for Trump and how their affiliations are with him, how strong their affiliations are with him. We're also going to talk about the city of Portland and some of its political fissures, especially this week around the issue of whether or not the police should be wearing body cams. Bill's done some research on that, and we're also going to talk about the future of the Democratic Party on the state and national level in light of this weekend's election of a new Democratic National Committee chairman. And I guess so. Well, you start, Alan. Tell us about this poll and what really caught your eye about it.
Well, as a lot of us talk about the Trump victory, of course, and I hear often people saying things about Trump voters as though they're one monolithic block. And whenever people do that, they're not understanding the motivations of the various elements of his support. And from a Democratic standpoint, how do you break off elements? What this poll that CBS did, I think better than anybody's done yet, Pew has done some nice work, and a couple of others, is to really get into the Trump vote. Who and how is it comprised, and what element of it is rock solid for Trump no matter what? And we talk about this often. His supporters will always support him. In fact, the polling doesn't bear it out at all, and I think the number is roughly about a quarter of his voters, or Republican voters in general, would stay with him regardless of what he does. But a slightly higher number, they're off the reservation if he doesn't turn the economy around. I mean, these are the last, in my view, some of the late voters in particular these are voters who voted for Obama in 2008, many of them. They were frustrated then, they wanted change, they're frustrated now, they want change, and they'll move on to the next guy. So I just thought all of that was not only interesting, but instructive for how we think about what's just happened. And again, for Democrats have to understand this stuff, or they're going to make a lot of mistakes by lumping everyone together. I've had people write to me and say, we ought to just give up on all those the blue-collar Trump people, because we'll never get them. And it's a horrible mistake if they do that.
Well, so what about the people who say the 2012 election had a demographic makeup, the electorate had a demographic makeup that was different from this one, and if you could somehow recreate that, get the minority turnout that you got in 2012, Hillary Clinton would have won?
Well, I think there was an embedded assumption there that you would keep the blue-collar white vote that you had in 2012, and that, remember all the talk about the demographic revolution and how the Republican Party was about to die because women and minorities were growing in such numbers that Democrats would always win. That presumption there was that your traditional Democratic voter would stay with the party, and some of what we saw this time is they didn't.
Mm-hmm. I like the way they organized that poll. You had mentioned this in an email, Alan, and that they divided the group into the believers, the conditionals, the curious, and the resistors, which I think are very apt labels for these people. And the believers, of course, being that 22%. Who are very reminiscent of Paula Page's core here in Maine, although I would say that core has always been considerably higher than 22%. But the conditionals and the curious, the conditionals being the ones for whom the vote was a transactional experience and they expect results, or as you say, they're going to bail. And the curious who aren't real wild about this, but are kind of waiting to see what he does, are the people, I think, on whom the future of this administration hinge. And they skew away from the ideological toward the economic. So then the question, the underlying question becomes, will the economy improve or falter under Trump? And depending on which way it goes, so go those people. And normally, I think an incoming president often, sometimes unfairly, benefits from the successes of his predecessor, in that things are going good and that person gets all the credit. But I think there are some signs early on in this administration that come out of Trump's ideology, such as immigration, such as America First when it comes to trade, that could have really serious economic consequences.
And healthcare.
Absolutely.
And healthcare. So to think that maybe under Trump or maybe despite Trump, the economy could improve, I think is to overlook these really serious issues where, from an economics standpoint, he seems to be on the wrong side. So I'm not at all convinced the economy is going to continue to improve or grow under this administration.
Well, and I think until pollsters can adequately explain their miserable failure after the last election, it's really hard to rely too heavily on anything that these pollsters say. I just don't know that I buy into these neat, divides between people. And as much as I'd like to be able to use that information, accurately predict the future, I'm just wary that polling is really the best way to take the temperature or not. I can't think of a better way, but I'm not totally confident with information.
Most of the polling I saw had Hillary Clinton winning by about 3%, which is basically what she did nationally, right? And what was really confusing, I think, to me, was the probability charts that said, she had an 85% chance of winning, or I think in the New York Times had it over 90.
Right.
And
it had actually dipped down into the 70s just before the election, but yeah, it was
so it's like, and then at one point they said, well, it's about the same as a NFL kicker missing a 40-yard field goal. But then there's like,
which really
what if
helped
she
me
gets
lot.
a bad snap?
It's more like the extra point, only now they changed the distance.
Yeah. So I agree with you that was the. That there was a misleading impression going into the election that it was a lock for her. But in retrospect, when I look back, the numbers were not that far apart. And the big surprise was some of those states that she lost.
Absolutely.
The big industrial states where there seemed to be some turnout issues. But
the thing, I think another question that article and poll present is, so what does it matter what his supporters think or do, because he's not up for re-election, for 4 years. I just wonder if their support of Donald Trump, whether the conditional supporters or the other categories, if they're going to take out their feelings in the 2018 congressional elections. I mean, what's the consequence of these groups? I just don't know. What are they going to do with it, with their dissatisfaction, for instance, if he does repeal Obamacare and the economic consequences are dire for like a lot of people who support him? Are they going to go out and do what?
Well, in 2010, it was the midterms. That's what happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's what everybody's assuming right now, is that as the Tea Party went, so will go whatever we eventually label this insurgency on the left, and how much impact are they going to have?
But it gives Republicans such an opportunity to run in 2 years, because then they can be running against Trump too. And so I don't know if Democrats necessarily benefit. They could use it to their advantage.
2006 was a change election. That's when the Democrats took both houses of Congress, and 2008 was a change election with Obama's election, and 2010 was a change election when the Republicans took back the House, and maybe 2012 wasn't. but that's the only one I can remember. That we're in a cycle of people are dissatisfied with the status quo.
Just for the record, I was elected in 2006, 2008, 2010. In case anyone
How'd you
wants
do
to
in
put me in a
2012?
box.
Yeah,
I know,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, 2012 was the change year
Was
for me.
the not change. That was
Fourth-
like the
fourth time's
that
a
was
charm.
the status quo election.
What those numbers tell me, and I agree with Cynthia, that this is the most amazing breakdown of polling since the history of polling, really. There's nothing like it. And, the campaigns in those presidential elections have the best polling in the world. Their polling is better than anybody. And so Clinton's polling told them they were good in the Midwestern states. They didn't have to go there. Right. That's how bad the polling was for everybody. And I don't know if Trump even had polls. He just went out and did a lot of events.
He took a couple of polls on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think Barron handled that.
Yeah. But what the numbers told me that is significant is how spongy his support actually is. It isn't rock support, and that's just a good. Exactly. I just wanted to remind myself when I read that.
Right.
Don't fall into this thinking he's got this monolithic block of support. He doesn't. And all national elections are about the economy, really. Presidential elections more than anything. It's that block that votes in the last 10 days of a presidential election. They're just coming on how they feel. That's my experience. Do they feel hopeful? Is it getting better or is it getting worse? And that's the way they're going. They're not really ideological at all. And so that, Hillary ran a good campaign to me until the last 10 days. But you still have that huge block of voters that they're just tuning in. They haven't even been watching TV ads until the last 10 days or week. And then they start to talk to their sister or, the guy down at the store to figure out what to do. So I think Democrats have to figure out how to not have this happen again. And to me, it's in those numbers.
We have to also remember that we're talking about Donald Trump here. And just this past week, I got a call from my very close, very wealthy Republican friend who was taking a house, as they put it, in Palm Beach, and called me with one very simple and startling question. And he's heavily invested in a lot of ways in the Republican Party. And he said to me, "Do you think he's going to make it?" And I said, "What do you mean, do I think he's going to make it?" I said, "Do you mean, do I think he's going to, complete a 4-year term?" And he said, "That's exactly what I mean." And so the point underlying that, I think, is that we continue to evaluate Donald Trump through the prism of normalcy and normal expectations. And we are less than 2 months into this thing. So I don't think that it's out of the question to at least ponder that there may be an event, whatever it might be, that could ultimately lead to his political downfall before the end of his term. We don't know that. And I mean, if it can happen to Richard Nixon, it can certainly happen to Donald Trump.
I know, but I'm just reminded of hearing echoes of that when LePage was elected.
Right.
People thinking it was inevitable he wasn't going to make it. How could this, erratic, crazed person actually govern for 4 years? And he did.
When it comes to erratic and crazed, I would suggest that Paul LePage is a pillar of stability. In comparison to Donald Trump.
He's a lot more conventional ideologically. Like Paul LePage's ideas are a lot more out of the Republican playbook.
Correct.
I think you just gave Governor LePage his first
campaign
for Senate.
A
pillar of stability.
What
was it?
Nemitz.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget about the
listening, Governor?
comparison to Trump. Just the first part.
Pull a quote.
Right. Henny Youngman joke. How's your wife compared to what?
Yeah, right.
But so a little closer to home, there's a national question that's come up as a local issue, and it's about whether or not police should wear body cams. And it came up locally after a shooting, kind of tragic shooting of a young guy probably mentally ill, or with a history of mental illness anyway, who bought a pellet gun and was waving it around in a crowded shopping plaza, allegedly aiming it at people. And police got a call that there was a man with a rifle in a shopping plaza, and they showed up. They didn't get close. They were 100 feet away. One of the officers was behind a car and had him in his sights, and they were giving him instructions. And according to the police, he would not put down the gun, or he attempted to pick up the gun when they told him not to, and they shot him and killed him. And our mayor, Ethan Strimling, joined a number of advocacy groups and called for a speeding up of the process to get body cams on police officers, and as a check for this kind of incident. And I know, Bill, you've done some research in this. And
yeah, that caught my attention. I thought I'd write about it for Sunday, and not whether Mayor Strimling wants a body camera and he wants to turn it on himself all the time.
Yeah.
But rather, what is going on.
I don't think you want to suggest that.
I know. I put the idea out there now. I can see it'll be live streamed 24/7.
Yeah.
What I was curious about, it actually reminded me of a story I read last April in the New York Times, in which they focused on the work of an assistant law professor down at the University of South Carolina by the name of Seth Stoughton. And he's a former police officer, served on kind of a SWAT team himself before going into academia. And he has put together a series of videos in which he plays the officer. And the scenarios are shot from a number of different perspectives. One, of course, being the body camera that he's wearing. Another is from a short distance away, and in some other cases, it's from a much longer distance. And it was a test. It was presented by the Times as a test. Is look at these body cam videos and then react multiple choice to what you see. And what they found was that if you rely on body cameras alone, the chances of you completely misinterpreting what's happening are remarkably high. In one case, I don't want to give away the column, but I'll give away one of them. Mm-hmm. In one case, the officer and the subject are very close together, and it looks very much like they're engaged in an all-out fistfight, brawl. It's just out of control. And so you assume that watching it. And then you click on the next perspective from 20, 30 feet away, and they're doing like they're dancing, right, basically. And there are several other scenarios involving traffic stops and things like that all point to the fact, and I spoke at length today with Professor Stoughton, that body cameras are a tool, but they are not the tool. And when you have shootings such as the one that happened here this past week, and automatically jump to the conclusion that if everybody had body cameras, we would know exactly what happened, is a false premise. He equated it to a hammer. A hammer is a very useful tool. Right. You can use it for all kinds of things, or you can use it to drive nails. You can use it to extract nails if it has a claw on the end. But there are some things a camera can't do, like if you have a screw and a piece of wood, a hammer's not going to do you a lot of good. Right. And he equates the body camera to that. It has a very specific use, and in some cases it's useful. In other cases, it can be very counterproductive if it's the only source of evidence.
Yeah, but you know what it can do is it records that interaction between, like, say, the officer pulling somebody over or stopping them on the street, and that's what a lot of the debate arises from, is people feeling that they were singled out and attacked or provoked by an officer, and we all have seen video of police behaving badly by now. I mean, there's tons of it out there. So having a video record of an officer doing the job the right way seems to be almost a requirement.
And what you're pointing out is not just a video record, but an audio record. And he points that out too. He said sometimes the audio is a lot more valuable than the video.
I should just note that my law firm represents many police officers. So with that disclosure, I would just add that, the fact that there wasn't a body cam in this particular case doesn't mean there wasn't a video or other evidence that needs to be, I think, carefully examined before any conclusion was reached. And I think the mistake was immediately politicizing this incident without having all the information. I mean, we don't know. There may well be a video of the entire incident that needs to be viewed and examined. I think it's unfortunate that, the mayor got into it with the chief of police because everyone agrees in Portland that there should be body cams. There's money set aside. It's just a question of rolling out the program. And it just seemed like a poor start to what hopefully will be a successful program.
I was stunned by how swift the response was from the chief to the mayor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's another indicator of some of the problems that I think Strimley's having. I don't live in Portland, so I'm kind of an observer from away, but I tried immediately to imagine that happening in other cities. The mayor comes out with a strong, we got to do this, and the chief of police basically fires back.
Said, I'm disgusted.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
and I got to think that some conversations took place ahead of time and some didn't. Like, it seems to me there was not a conversation. I don't know this, but I'm guessing that Mayor Strimling did not call up the chief before he made that statement and say, hey, look, chief, I'm about to make a statement. And maybe that conversation should have taken place. And I also am willing to maybe not bet, but guess that the chief of police, before he came out swiftly denouncing his statement, I wouldn't be surprised if he had a conversation with the the city manager.
Yeah.
I mean, I think...
Yeah. Well, I took Chief Soschuk's remarks, I wasn't that surprised by them because what I saw was a chief of police sticking up for his officer, in this case, and his officers in general. And, you mentioned other cities, Alan, and, many, in my opinion, many other cities would be immensely fortunate to have a police chief of the caliber and temperament of Mike Soschuk.
No.
I
don't mean to criticize the chief at all.
Right.
No, I understand.
It just shows you where the relationship is.
That's right.
Yeah.
However it came to it, you have relationships between top leaders in the city, which are very public and very antagonistic.
And it's a volatile situation.
Yeah.
No, on this issue and on whatever other issue might come down the pike. You're right. I mean, it all happened so fast.
Yeah.
And it may have something to do with the fact that the way the city is structured, the mayor has no oversight of the department heads. And right now, he's not even allowed to talk to them. No. He has to go through the city manager, and that relationship is toxic.
Right.
And
at the same time, the city council is freezing him out of their press conferences when they lined up yesterday to voice their support essentially for the chief here.
They need to work
because
that
what
out.
he said was factually incorrect. He said that
Right.
that the pilot program wasn't going to start until the following budget year, when actually it's going to start this year or the next budget year, which starts in a few months. And
this is the mayor not being factually correct.
Yeah. The mayor was not factually correct.
I think he later said he didn't know that there was money available right now until he heard it at the council's press conference.
Right. So, but the other councilors seem to know. And
see, and I see this as a really lost opportunity because obviously the people of Portland voted to change the charter and to have a mayor. And in this context, politically, you have a city of Portland and a governor who hates the city of Portland and an immigrant issue that Ethan could own. Like, that to me, that's his job, is he should be advocating for the city of Portland against Augusta, who, and he would do well at that. But the city needs to figure out what he's supposed to be doing and let him do it, because he's a skilled guy and he was elected to be mayor. He needs a job.
One last point on the body cameras that I think is worth making, and that is because it played out to some extent in South Portland as they've adopted them. And that is the question of policies and procedures surrounding their use and data storage and all that kind of stuff. One thing that kind of floored me about the South Portland situation was I don't know if it was resistance, but perhaps maybe at least reluctance on the part of the police to make public their policy. surrounding the use of these devices. And again, I spoke to Professor Stoughton about that, and he was flabbergasted.
Yeah.
He said that's, I think the phrase he used was, that's just plain stupid. It's very important in coming up with your priorities and why you're doing this and how you're going to do this to communicate that to the public. Police body cameras, after all, are all about transparency.
Yeah.
So how can it be transparent if you slap one on every cop in the city and then say to the public, we're not going to let you know how we go about doing this?
That we're only turning them on under certain
was a mistake.
circumstances.
So right, there's a lot of really sensitive areas around them. Police run into people and they're having the worst days of their lives. They often go into their homes. There has to be a policy about when you turn the camera off, and I'm sure as a lawyer that would be very significant.
Sure.
At what point in the alleged activity did the camera get turned off, and why, and
compliance in general is another issue.
Yeah, with the policies.
If you're going to require, you can require policemen to have them on under certain situations, but you also at the same time have to enforce that policy.
Mm-hmm.
He cited one police department, I think in Phoenix, where they found that 14% of the officers were complying with the policy. Now try telling that to a judge and jury.
Right.
In a civil litigation against the city. It's going to come back and bite you.
I just think. Go ahead.
My daughter's freshman year of college, she was involved in a hazing incident in another state where the kids were forcing each other to drink shots of like salad dressing and ketchup, and a peace officer came upon the scene, and at one point he said, "How about I turn off the dash cam and make you drink ketchup?" And they all agreed that was a good idea, so he did. So that's my only experience with this kind of thing. But
I think the last thing, the important point about all of this is the last thing that Portland needs is just some political infighting in City Hall to all of a sudden cause rife between the police and the community that the police officers are trying to protect. There shouldn't be, they shouldn't use this horrific. I'm sure the police officer involved is gravely in despair over what happened. It must just be so. Difficult to deal with and challenging as a department. And so I think people have to just wait until the facts come out before they quickly jump to a conclusion.
I have never in all my life met a police officer who started his day by saying, geez, I hope I get to shoot someone today. And this implication that made by the yahoos who showed up at City Hall yesterday is that the police actually, get their jollies doing this, I think is just an absolute insult, not only to the police, but to all of our intelligence.
Right, and it's some very angry protesters, right, that showed up, and they called Sawchuck a murderer. And they are responding to a kind of a national story. They were not responding to stuff that happened here, because there's no indication that anybody did anything wrong here or in a number of other incidents. And if you can't, Sawchuck is the guy that you want. That's the kind of police chief that you want in a city like this. Somebody who's ready to explain himself and talk to people in a very transparent way. He's not some like tough old cop who doesn't think it's anybody else's business. And this is somebody that you want to foster and get along with.
I try to imagine how Mike Chitwood would have handled this situation.
Yeah.
I'm not to disparage Chief Chitwood. He was a good guy, but completely different style, shall we say.
Right. He would have probably called all four of us by now.
So who's going to be the mayor of Portland next? That's what I want to know. I mean,
who would want
this job? It's a terrible job.
I wrote my column this week about a group called Progressive Portland that put out a scorecard of how progressive each of the councilors were. And it's like 9 councilors in the most progressive city in the country. Not in the country, in the state by far. But up there with Ann Arbor, Michigan, not even these big university towns. And the best score was Ethan Strimling with an 83.
Surprise!
Yeah, and after that it was John Hink, who the same group had just worked to get unelected.
That's right.
And everybody else is in like the 40s. And how could this be? How could this like reactionary government get elected in a city like this? And it's because they have their own standard about what's progressive. And
yeah, I think those scorecards can be very misleading and not helpful.
Yeah.
Well, they can just they can change the definition of a word. I mean, progressive goes from being like, oh, forward thinking and reasonable and fair and caring about the environment and equal rights to all of a sudden being this like, crazed zealot on the left.
Dyspeptic Portland.
But I think what I'm seeing a lot of is people look at what the Tea Party did in the Republican side, and they were uncompromising and very clear about what they believed in, and they kind of taken over the world. And there's a lot of debate that people on the left need to have some kind of left-wing Tea Party, and that's what this looks like to me. What do you think of that?
What looks like it? Progressive Portland?
Progressive Portland is trying to be a ideologically pure, hardcore, uncompromising, progressive liberal group.
I think there are parallels. I think that's a good point between them and the early, Tea Party patriots and all the various groups that popped up back around 2010, and many of them short-lived.
Yeah,
I'm not suggesting this one's going to be. I get the sense actually that they're going to be around for a while, but they do have that kind of my way or the highway feel to them.
Well, then maybe they'll get some results, because since the Tea Party came along, the Republicans have been doing really well in elections. And I'm not suggesting that I, adhere or support necessarily the tactics, but
sure.
I understand why some Democratic groups would want to do something differently because, the formula isn't.
But, there's no left-wing Alec and Koch brothers.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with having a progressive grade book. I mean, that's a great way for a political organization to grow its base, to be relevant, to be, brought into a conversation. That's how you do grassroots politics is you have to get people on board with some agenda that everyone can get around. And, to their credit, Progressive Portland, I think, is one of the few groups that's been organized, that's been called to comment on behalf of a certain demographic who has political power to a certain extent, is backing the mayor. So I don't know. I don't know that I'll be out, protesting angrily against anyone in the near future, but I certainly get it.
I think you made a good point in your column this week, though, Greg, when you pointed out that when you deal with a pretty limited sampling of votes, and then base the rating simply on a yes or a no, in a city this small where so many things overlap and there are so many competing factors that go into any one of these votes, that it can be overly simplistic to end up with a final grade that strikes me as not having any layers to it.
Well, but simplistic is what wins. I mean, make America great again.
That's true, but it worked.
Like,
That's true.
It's just
do those ends justify the means? Is my question politically. And do you really want to go down the same road that the Tea Party went down when it comes to rhetoric and tactics? I'm not sure that's the way to go.
Especially if
the Tea Party on the right had a cohesion around a couple of major points that they could spread their messaging around healthcare, taxes, money in Washington. I mean, there was a great cohesion to all that chaos. I struggle to find the cohesion on the left.
Right.
I mean, it's not what the left is known for. It's known for atomizing and eating its young.
Right.
Basically.
And there was a lot of money behind that, too. Dark money that no one quite knew about at the time.
I suspect there's some money around the national organizing on the left right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's of the level of the Koch brothers.
Well, yeah. But so I'm delighted. I mean, I'm delighted that there's some grassroots, crazy stuff going on, because that's the way you're going to beat the crazy stuff. At least you need that element around the country. But longer term, it's hard to see, what are the defining issues? I suppose healthcare will be one.
Yeah.
There'll be a few, but those groups can split apart very easily as time goes on. Hopefully they won't. But
for instance, Black Lives Matter, which I consider to be part of this organizing energy. Are they going to work with other groups on other kinds of issues?
Yeah.
Or is it just police, and is everybody, who doesn't meet their incredibly high standard of how angry you should be, part of the problem?
Well, bring that down to a local level. Does progressive Portland intersect with the kids who disrupted the city council meeting the other day?
Well,
is there? I haven't.
they
seen
came
it,
out
but
right. They came before Ethan came out on the body cam thing. They put out a press release.
That's right,
saying that that this is proof that we need officer body cams right away. We can't wait.
See, I can understand. To me, that's an appropriate role for a political group. That there's a death in the community. There's a black person who's killed by a police officer. There's a national issue around policing. It was part of the election. It seems to me perfectly appropriate for a political organization to put out a press release and get conversation around it. Where I saw the unfortunate step was when the mayor and all of a sudden the police chief had to immediately respond. It seemed too soon. For the political leaders to come out and say things without all the facts, I think was.
And there has to be some logic behind their message, though. And I still fail to see the logic behind the claim that in this particular incident, based on what we know, that police body cameras would be invaluable in trying to determine what happened. So what I question is, how much did they think this through based on the circumstances, limited as they may be, as we know them right now? And as a result, lacking that, it struck me more as opportunism than an effort to legitimately create a public policy debate.
So, well, opportunism, that to me is synonymous with these political groups.
Well,
is their purpose, is to see a political opportunity and capitalize on it.
So speaking of a political group, Democrats are electing a new party chairman this weekend, and you've written some about this, and we have some more coming on Sunday. I haven't seen it yet, but I understand it's already in the can.
Right. Well, there is an election Saturday. The Democratic National Committee members, as well as chairs and vice chairs, will cast a vote. Something like 400 and something votes. There's several candidates. Some are outside what we consider the mainstream, but generally it's a redo of the primary with, the sort of what would generally be referred to as the establishment Clinton Democrats supporting one candidate, Tom Perez, and then a lot of the Sanders supporting a congressman from Minnesota. So I'm curious whether or not the election of a chair will make much of a difference. Yeah. My hope is that the National Party recognizes the importance of just getting resources and support to the local races. That's where Democrats have to win. They have to, in local races, in every town, in every county, in every state, there has to be a developing of candidates. And that's where these national figures can make a difference. They can either put priorities on a 50-state, program like Howard Dean, or they can stick with we have to raise big money from big, huge donors and, have a bunch of kids on laptops trying to figure out all the numbers.
Was I not paying attention, or I don't recall ever seeing a race for party chairman that has been going on this long with this high profile? They're having televised debates. Is this something that happens all the time?
I think it's unique to the fallout from this election. I'm kind of tickled to see Keith Ellison still in the running, because I actually, in doing some speaking engagements over the fall, was using him shamelessly. There's a video from July of 2015. It's from ABC Sunday Morning, with George Stephanopoulos, and Keith Ellison was the guest. And he was being interviewed by George and Maggie Haberman from the New York Times. And this clip begins with Ellison's, they're talking about Donald Trump, who at that point is just 1 month into his candidacy, and everybody's still, holding their sides, laughing about it. And he says, he warns them. He says something to the effect that, just beware, because this guy has a lot of support in a lot of places, especially in the Midwest, and it would not be impossible to imagine him as the Republican nominee, and he gets that far, and you can no longer hear him because Stephanopoulos and Haberman are laughing so loud at him. And George says, "Oh, you don't really think that," and Maggie says, "Sorry to laugh," you know. And he goes on to point out how Jesse Ventura won in Minnesota. He's seen this thing before. And I have yet to find a more prescient analysis of Donald Trump that early from anyone but Keith Ellison. So to see him now vying for leadership of the Democratic Party, I don't think is a bad thing.
Oh, I think there's two. All of the candidates are exceptional. And to your point, I think it's good that it's so public, because a lot of these conversations have to take place. I mean, this has to happen. If there's going to actually be change in the Democratic Party, there has to be this conversation about what does the party stand for, what direction are we going, and even if one side doesn't win, at least they've been heard, you know. And
although I'm hearing them, they all say the same things. The three big ones: Ellison, Perez, and Buttigieg, I think is how he pronounces his name, are saying
which might disqualify.
I think that right along.
Right. Although
He's got two G's that sound like J's, and you know, he's an impressive young guy, and but they all say very similar things about organizing, about local elections, about money in. But it's being treated like this is some huge ideological fight for the soul of the party between you know, a congressman and a former cabinet member who are fairly similar politically.
Except that Ellison is a Muslim.
That's true.
Yeah, and he's a member of Congress.
I think that's huge.
And you know, Perez is from Buffalo.
Yeah.
So
right.
You know.
And Ellison, of course, has said he'll resign his congressional seat if he wins.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, it seems like it's a proxy war for ideological forces. You know, the Bernie people versus the Clinton people. But I'm surprised, I guess, how hard those feelings still are, and how they're not receding.
Well, the primary wasn't. I mean, when you looked at the policy differences between Clinton and Sanders, it's not like there was a lot of light shown. There is a division, and I agree. It's not necessarily all about policy.
So
there's no national leadership who's the leader of the Democratic Party right now? Which group is, you know? So in a sense, this is the beginning of defining who will be the voices and the leaders of the party going forward. Part of the problem, I think, and this is the only venue you have really to do that, is the DNC. And it's a big struggle over whether it's going to be more mechanics or more message. And to me, that's the way it breaks down, the people that want to work on mechanics.
What's fascinating about your question is that the name Barack Obama doesn't even come up as the leader of the Democratic Party.
Right.
After what many consider to be a successful presidency that history will only look more kindly on as time goes by. You look at the...
Well, he weighed in.
He's the de facto leader.
Well, he weighed in yesterday, and the response that I heard on the radio from DNC members is, well, he shouldn't be telling us what to do. Like, he's done. He's gone.
Look at the reverence with which the Republicans, for generations, viewed Ronald Reagan.
Still do. Yeah.
And you look at the Democrats, and they're saying, this guy, you know, I mean, if you're a Democrat, you love this guy.
Oh, absolutely.
And for those people to now be, as you say, Alan, essentially telling him to butt out.
Well,
3 months after he leaves, or less than a month or two after he leaves office.
But you have to remember there is an intense election about to happen, so they just want him to butt out until after the person is elected. You know what I mean? Like Barack Obama. I don't think there's a Democrat you could find that says Barack Obama is not a de facto leader. I think Hillary Clinton is one of the de facto leaders of the Democratic Party. And I know that, you know, a lot of people in the Sanders camp might not agree, but I think she is. When she speaks, people listen. And so the election, I think, is going to say something about the Democratic Party. It'll be interesting to see what exactly that is.
I hear from Maine Democrats all over the board, but some of them who are really angry at Hillary Clinton and feel that she was the the reason that we have Trump now, and that she did not run a good campaign, and that she has this well of what's the opposite of love? That people,
hate. It's
yes,
hate.
are mistrust. Really, I mean, it's not.
No, it's hate.
But
Yeah, that's what I'm writing about Sunday.
okay, so that's the kind of thing that I don't see just sort of resolving itself. It's connected to this, not just her, but also to her husband and to that style of Democrat that was able to win elections for a while and is now seen as a bad vehicle, as something that's going to that brought this terrible defeat on us.
And it's the people that have that kind of perverse logic, the people who think that those supporters of Hillary Clinton are what caused her to lose, are the people that Democrats really need to seriously
Well, I'd take another take on it, though. Look, I mean, you can make the argument that Hillary Clinton had all the cards. She had the weakest presidential opponent since probably Taft, right? I mean, she had no business losing that election. So,
I think of who Taft ran against.
well, yeah, maybe that's unfair to Taft, but she, I mean,
Yeah, but
it was all there, and she didn't pull it off. So it's hard to blame it on other people. It was her campaign. I thought, and I wrote this, I thought she was great in the debates. But, she has a pretty long history of running weak campaigns outside of New York Senate campaign. I thought both of her national campaigns were weak campaigns, and they both ended in failure.
I would say, the vociferous Bernie supporters who now are so angry at Hillary Clinton, many of them were just as angry at her in the primary.
Right.
And they helped define her as untrustworthy and incapable.
Lazy.
They grabbed hook, line, and sinker all the talking points from Republicans and repeated them and repeated them. And I think that the Democratic Party did her a disservice by not calling them out. There was misogyny in the primary. There are people who supported Bernie Sanders and then supported Donald Trump, not because they made some assessment about who the best candidate was, because they hated Hillary Clinton. They had a rational hatred for her. And I'm sorry, when you have a rational hatred towards a candidate of your own party and you actively work to define her as someone she is not, you have no business, in my view, then attacking her for losing.
Well, they did call those people out. Unfortunately, it was through the emails that were leaked and not by any public pronouncement. I mean, clearly there was that antipathy toward the Sanders crowd. It came through once the
Sanders, to his credit, called it out. I mean,
that's typical, right?
You're right. It was never made.
But I think
that
group is so tiny relative to the larger election. To me, I mean,
the people who actually didn't vote.
No, I mean the Sanders diehards who were mad at Clinton all the time.
And voted for
Every
Trump.
campaign has people who are in losing primary who are mad at the winner all the way through. I mean, there's nothing new with that. What I thought you were talking about, Greg, and I just had this experience at a party where I mentioned that there was this bubbling talk about 2020 Clinton. And the whole room groaned, and they were all Clinton supporters. They weren't Bernie Sanders wingnuts. They were. So this also happens with every national election where your candidate loses. Right. You want to be done with them.
There's recrimination,
and especially they've sort of been around a long time. Okay, they had the time. I mean that's not a scientific poll, but I think that's widespread among Democrats. It's not hatred with those people. Obviously, it's not even loss of affection. It's just wanting to move on, wanting to go to the next thing, wanting to try something different.
But it does seem like some candidates who lose get the credit for losing because they're too smart or they're too independent or they're too this. And then I don't know, it just seems to me like a lot of Democratic women who lose are immediately sort of put into a category of, loser as opposed to somebody who gave it their best and was, I don't know.
Well, I think there's some male members of that group too, like John Kerry and Michael Dukakis. People that go, "Oh, I wish Michael Dukakis would run again," But I'm sorry.
Just a point going back to the poll that we began this discussion on. I thought, and this goes to the division within the Democratic Party and who participated and who didn't. of the so-called resistors in that poll, those who are, basically what's the new incarnation of the Never Trump crowd, 4 in 10 of those people, and they're the largest group of the 4, by the way, they're up over around 35%. 4 in 10 of those people didn't vote in the 2016 presidential election. Now, I'm not suggesting that it would have changed things electorally, because I doubt a lot of these people live in those states where that tip the electoral balance. But it does indicate to me that there was a pretty widespread defection from the political process by people who came out of that primary so disillusioned.
It was a
that
brutal.
they saw nothing wrong with ceasing their participation at that point and not going on and voting in November. And I think that's one number in that poll that hit me right between the eyes. I mean, if you're that passionate, if it's about Bernie or whatever, to go from being that passionate one minute to being completely disengaged from the election on the next, I think speaks volumes about the depth of these people's real commitment to the democracy.
I agree.
I didn't look at I didn't have access to the background on that poll, but I would guess many of those 40% were people in their 20s.
Yes.
And that's a pattern that repeats in every election. That they, if their person isn't elected,
They take their ball and go home.
they drift back and go to the lounge.
Well, I hope they learn their lesson this
I
time.
hope so too. I really do.
And a lot of people, because of, my son was a big Sanders supporter. So he's never even been political, but he went like crazy, and and everybody in the family was asking on email, the wide extended family, oh, what should we do? Including the younger folks who were Sanders supporters. And I remember him saying, Clinton's got this in the bag.
Yeah.
So either don't vote or vote for the Green candidate. Fortunately, the person he was directing that to had other interventions and ended up voting. But I think there was a lot of that at work, too.
Exhibit A to my argument.
Right.
Yeah.
Which gets it back to the beginning. About how the polls.
Hillary didn't have a wide enough excited base. There were a lot of folks who liked her better than Trump, but there weren't a lot who were getting up every morning and working all day and talking to everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, if you could measure the comparisons between Trump and Clinton, that intensity part would be quite a deficit for Clinton. I mean, it wasn't like Obama in 2008, where everybody was excited.
But the price was so high to be excited. It was exhausting to be excited about Hillary Clinton. I can tell you from personal experience. If you expressed excitement, you were just immediately just the object of just intense insults and like arguments and aggression. I mean, at the state convention, it was like it was really hard.
Yeah, I know.
It was.
So what does the DNC do with this?
I know that's the big.
I mean, how do you put this back together again? And if the personalities are gone, if Hillary Clinton doesn't resurface, where does it go?
Well, I think there's a big reset button, and it starts with a T. I think they need to.
I don't get it. T.
Trump.
Oh.
I think I think
Sorry.
Again, that's going to like him, hate him, or whatever. He is going to define the political landscape going forward over the next at least year or two, and so I think the Democrats certainly ignore that at their own peril. And if this does devolve into relitigating and fighting all these old battles, then good luck.
I feel like I lived through that movie.
Yeah.
In Maine with
that's the column I'm doing this weekend.
Yeah.
The National Democrats should not learn from Maine.
Right.
Right.
Study what happened here.
Right.
Do the opposite.
And do the opposite.
Because
don't do as I say or as I did.
Yeah.
There was a feeling.
The parallels between the LePage phenomenon 6 years ago and the Trump are eerie when you actually go through them. And the next parallel will be what happens in the off-year election, and then what happens in Trump's reelection. And Maine should be under the microscope
Yeah.
for what not to do, to throw out, crazy guy who snuck in for 4 years and by every measure should have been gone.
So,
So that's
I
a
remember
different column on
Yeah.
going into
forward to that
2014. I thought that LePage's supporters were intense, but there was a small number of them, and they were unreachable. And there was about less than 40% of the population, and just the matter of would just be the other candidates sorting out who was the most likely candidate to win against LePage, and that candidate would get the benefit, would most of that 60%, and walk into the Blaine House. And that's exactly what they tried to do, and that's exactly what didn't happen.
Yeah.
What happened?
I know, that's the thing, is even if you could say, I agree with you, Alan, look at Maine and don't do, but the question is then what to do? And I think the opportunity is for Democrats to drive a wedge between Trump and Republicans in Congress and exploit it and widen it as best they can and play to Trump's strengths or weaknesses depending on your perspective. Like just push to get infrastructure, gush on whatever over him on Twitter, do whatever you have to do to work with Trump on some things. I do think that they should do that. I think that's a mistake that the Democrats did not do in Maine, is they did not try to get a few big things done with LePage to take that opportunity away from the narrative about, they're just obstructionist.
Well, didn't they? I mean, the first 2 years, pretty much everything LePage got done, he got done in that first 2 years. And didn't Democrats work with LePage to get the tax
Emily
cuts?
Kane and
I think they did
and the
until they
budget.
get tired of doing it and then taking it on the chin anyway.
Right.
You know.
And then they took control of the legislature, both bodies.
Yeah, right.
well, sorry.
And
Sorry
then,
about
it, then it became a matter of, polarization and obstruction.
Well, I don't mean getting things done for Trump. I mean getting things done for Democrats. Like the Democrats in Maine worked with LePage to get his agenda done. They worked with him on cutting taxes for the wealthy. They worked with him on, getting rid of Dale McCormick. I mean, just
Yeah.
Well, look at infrastructure. If the Democrats can triangulate here and to the point where they can deal with Trump on infrastructure, and what's more tangible than infrastructure? What's more tangible to the voters than, number one, they're finally replacing that crumbling bridge, and number two, local people are going to work to do it.
exactly.
Now, if they can somehow work that deal with Trump and at the same time cast the Republicans, particularly the House Republicans who don't want to spend a nickel on anything, cast them as the obstructionists, then it's a win-win. I think you're right. That's where the question is, can they manipulate Trump in that manner? And, will they nevertheless be in a position where they can claim some credit for it rather than have the Republicans say, see what we did?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's a tricky calculation, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the parallel challenge for Democrats is not so much tactical or what happens inside the legislature at the federal. I think the takeaway that I will be writing about is you face an insurgent change candidate. I've written about this before. Who's a message-driven candidate, few resources, doesn't play the traditional way. It's all message-driven, and it's all change-oriented. And if you're the opposing party and you put up a status quo candidate who doesn't articulate any kind of message, never mind a change message, I mean, it's the sort of formulaic message, that candidate's going to get killed. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, that's the great fear. I hate to be thinking 4 years ahead, but all that stuff is in the works now. And I thought Sanders, I've said it before, was an example of what Democrats need to do more about. Now, in saying that, I'm separating some of his policy ideas, which I think couldn't possibly ever come out of Washington any more than Trump's could, too far to the left. But the overall messaging and who it was messaged at is a valuable instruction to Democrats. I just don't, if it's not Hillary Clinton, if it's somebody who's been around for like 50 years and steeped in Democratic theology and saying all it's, but not talking about change. And right. I don't think, I think the unthinkable, which is what we all thought in Maine when LePage ran for re-election. We thought it wasn't possible that Democrats could lose that race. And sure enough. And in the end, it wasn't that close. Yeah. So that's what I want to, that's what I'm going to be talking about for Sunday is please don't do what Maine Democrats did.
All right. That's what Alan's got coming. What about you, Bill?
I'm going to be writing about the body cameras.
Oh, that's right.
Hopefully, if I can figure it out with my technically challenged brain, link our readers to some of these videos so that they can try it out themselves.
Good luck with that.
And Cynthia, right?
Well, yeah, as I said, I'm writing about how the new Democratic Party hopefully can learn from some of the lessons of the primary.
Right. So I don't write a column till Tuesday, so I might have to write this in an editorial before then. But I'm interested in why all this activism is around getting Susan Collins to have town hall meetings, but not Bruce Poliquin, who is actually, should be on the hot seat as well. But
because nobody wants to listen
nobody.
to him.
What does that say about Bruce Poliquin? Is that, no, it's okay. That's what we don't mind. We don't like those town hall meetings anyway. Okay, so that's it for this week, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast. Make sure you never miss a podcast episode by subscribing on iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. For more of our podcasts, visit pressherald.com/podcasts. Follow the link there to this episode to leave a comment. You can also leave a comment on our Facebook page. I'm Chad Gilley. Once again, thank you for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast.